Well, it's official. The brainworms have won. I did not think I was going to be making another one of these videos so soon after my last one, but I guess I've had A Song of Ice and Fire on the brain the past few months, and I have a couple more ideas I want to share. If you haven't already, you can see my last theory video here. People seem to like the ones that I talked about there. At least most people did. Obligatory spoiler warning here, both for A Song of Ice and Fire and for Fire and Blood / House of the Dragon this time, so that'll be fun. Also, sorry if someone has mentioned these before and I somehow missed it. This is for fun. We're all having fun here, okay? Great. Let's jump right into this. Theory 1, the Kiss of Life. I'm gonna talk about Lady Stoneheart again. Can you tell what my favorite plotline is yet? One of the reasons that Stoneheart is such an interesting character is that she has to have some important role in the story, particularly when it comes to the Long Night. Beric Dondarrion was resurrected 6 times, only for him to sacrifice himself to then bring back Catelyn Stark as Lady Stoneheart. R'hllor, or whatever being is giving the Red Priests their power, seemingly wants to stop the Long Night, or at the very least, keep the Long Night from ending the world. Such an overwhelming amount of power was given to Thoros of Myr, of all people, in the form of these resurrections, just to get to the creation of Lady Stoneheart. She has to be involved in this grand plan somehow. That's why I don't really like the idea of her just being, like, put down by someone like Arya or Brienne, and that being the conclusion of her story. It's just too much of an anticlimax. And even thematically, I don't like that for Catelyn's character. Here is a character who has suffered so much in her life, and she is brought back from the dead just to be killed by her own daughter or by a woman that she trusted. It gets across George's big message about the horrors of war and the corrupting power of revenge and perceived justice, but there are many other storylines that get this theme across, and it's just a really depressing end for Cat. I don't, however, think that she will be involved in the Long Night directly. It doesn't really seem like she has a particular skill or a piece of knowledge that would really turn the tides in the war against the White Walkers. She does lead the Brotherhood Without Banners right now, and that could be a helpful force, but Beric Dondarrion was doing that anyway, and the Brotherhood was a stronger group when he was alive. I believe, like a lot of other people, Cat will do what Beric Dondarrion did, giving the kiss of life to a character that has died and sacrificing her second life to bring this character back. And that individual is the one that plays a significant role in the Long Night. This is also more satisfying in my opinion because it gives her more agency in her death. This would be her finally giving up the hatred that she's held on to for so long and allowing her second life to have new meaning and potentially bring some good in the world. That begs the question as to who this person would be, and that's what I want to propose to you all today. Let's go through some contenders first before we go over who I think would be the best choice. Let's start with someone who, in a perfect world, would actually be my first choice. Jon Snow. He is a character who is freshly dead and obviously going to come back, has a strong connection to Catelyn, and clearly has some big role to play in the Long Night. This would also be a great conclusion for Cat's arc as well. This is a kid that she could never accept growing up due to factors that he himself couldn't control. She's finally forgiving both him and Ned for the wound that his very existence caused. She is finally acknowledging that Jon deserves to live, which is a nice full circle moment from when she told him that he should have been the one to fall out of the tower instead of Bran all the way back in A Game of Thrones. Also, if you've seen my last video, you know that I think there is a possibility that a piece of Robb's mind is also in Lady Stoneheart alongside Cat's. This would be a great conclusion for his character as well, ensuring that his brother Jon is able to succeed him as King in the North since he named Jon his heir. And yes, I do believe he actually named Jon as his heir in his will. I'm not usually one to call theories stupid. I mean, look at what I'm doing here. But it is clearly meant at the end of that chapter that he's naming Jon in the will. The theories saying that he might have changed his mind in between his conversation with Cat and the actual signing are just silly in my opinion. Anyway, unfortunately this whole idea of Jon being the one resurrected doesn't seem to be possible. Jon is dead at the Wall right now, and Stoneheart is currently in the Riverlands, 2 locations that are pretty far apart from one another. It's not even impossible that the Brotherhood are going to go to the Wall eventually. They'll most likely make their way there in order to join the fight against the White Walkers due to their connection to the Lord of Light, but right now, they're a bit busy. Even if the Brotherhood packed up and went to the Wall right now, there is no way that they would make it there in time before the Night's Watch burned Jon's body in order to keep him from becoming a White. Now, there is this weird cryptic quote that George made back in 2011 in an interview with Entertainment Weekly that implies that Jon hasn't died on page yet, so theoretically he could live a little bit longer. But he was stabbed 4 times in pretty vital places. He's not going to live much longer even if he did survive the initial attack. The only other thing I could think of is that the Watch would put his body in one of the ice cells in the wall, since it's suggested that corpses won't turn into whites if left in there. But why would they do that? Like, maybe if there's a trial against the mutineers and they keep his body as evidence? Yeah, any explanation to get Stoneheart to the wall in time just feels convoluted and unsatisfying. And honestly, Stoneheart isn't in a place really right now mentally to do this. She would need to do a lot of growing before she is emotionally in a place to forgive Jon, so sadly, he's out of the running. There's a bit of a tie for the next most obvious contenders, that being the still living Stark children. The only real options here are Sansa, who is the physically closest one to Stoneheart right now, and she is in a political situation at the Vale that could threaten her life, and Arya, who is most likely going to be in the Riverlands soon, even though right now she's in another continent in Braavos. Thematically, Arya makes the most sense here. Her and Stoneheart's storyline line up the most with the whole obsession with revenge. Stoneheart could see Arya dying in front of her. It maybe could even be her fault. Arya mentions a couple times after Ned dies that her family wouldn't recognize her anymore, and this could be a bit of foreshadowing here. Maybe at one point she tries to get to her mother, Stoneheart thinks she's a stranger, has her killed, and doesn't realize until afterward that it actually is Arya. This would then be the catalyst that steers both of these characters away from the paths that they're currently on. Both Stoneheart and Arya would realize in this moment the consequences of endless revenge. There are a couple reasons why I don't like this option though. There are so many Stark kids in the story dying and then coming back to life. I mean, there's Jon, and then Bran and Rickon both died and are soon going to re-enter the story. It's too many dead Stark kids. It's too much. And I don't really like the story beat for Arya. I've always seen her dying as her succumbing to her impulses for violence and revenge. There is no going back for this, especially considering how George does resurrection in his stories. They are changed after coming back, both physically and mentally. They begin to forget their past, forget what makes them human. They come back wrong. I believe if this happens to Arya, she will most likely become a new Lady Stoneheart, rather than, choosing to go down a lighter path. And we need at least one character in this story to not be corrupted by war. Someone to come back after doing bad things and be able to turn their lives around, to be the Septon Maribald of this generation. I think Arya fits better into this mold than the previous one. I would like it much better if Arya instead sees Stoneheart sacrifice herself and bring someone back and learn from that experience. I think it's a much cleaner transition. I believe there is a better option for this proposed resurrection, someone who is much closer to Stoneheart than any of the options I've mentioned before. In fact, someone that's making her way to Stoneheart right now. Lady Brienne of Tarth has an interesting relationship with Stoneheart. They haven't really known each other all that long in the grand scheme of things. And yet, Catelyn trusted Brienne with the thing that matters to her most, rescuing and protecting her children, only for at the end of A Feast for Crows to now perceive Brienne as having betrayed that trust. She has evidence that Brienne is working with Jaime Lannister, which she is, and because Roose Bolton said Jaime Lannister sends his regards as he was killing Robb, she now thinks that Brienne has turned against her. Stoneheart is even willing to execute Brienne and her companions, and only lets Brienne go once she agrees to lure Jaime back to the Brotherhood's camp. And the tragedy being that Brienne never betrayed Cat. Jaime does genuinely want to help rescue the girls, and Brienne has dedicated her life to this task, even neglecting her own family to do so. I could easily see Brienne giving her own life to prove this. There could be multiple ways that Brienne dies in Stoneheart's presence. This is a very dangerous situation that she's wandering back into. Stoneheart could have her and Jaime fight in a trial by combat, and then Brienne lets Jaime win. Stoneheart could just execute her outright. For thematic coherence, Brienne could sacrifice herself in order to protect Stoneheart, or even Arya if she's there. Maybe that scenario I described earlier plays out, with Stoneheart thinking Arya is a stranger and attacking her, and then Brienne, trying to protect Arya, dies in the process. Maybe something happens at what I think the Red Wedding 2.0 is going to be. Who knows? Well, all of this is just conjecture anyway. Let's get back to the main theory. Whatever happens, Brienne dies, and then Stoneheart realizes that she's made a mistake, and she brings her back with the kiss of life, seeing Brienne as not just a guard for her daughters, but a person that deserves to live in her own right. Bringing a satisfying end to Kat's arc as well, by proving that there are people in the world that she can rely on, and that killing for the sake of soul revenge is not worth it. Brienne has the skill and the motivation to make the world a better place, and she is a worthy person to have this second chance. Now, I don't like to just throw theories out there for the hell of it. I want there to be a motivation behind this story beat. What does Brienne being revived by Stoneheart do for the plot? How does she fit into R'hllor's plan and the Long Night in general? Now, this is the part of the theory where we wander a bit into Delulu land, so just stick with me for a bit with an open mind. Let's examine Brienne's character for a bit. She's a fighter. That's a big part of her identity. When we first meet her, she wins a melee in a tourney held by King Renly, while his host is camped at Bitterbridge, which is a place that's along the Mander River. This is what wins her a place on Renly's Rainbow Guard, and what directly leads her to witnessing his death, and subsequently being accused of killing Renly, and as a result, joining Kat's service. Another important fight that she wins is against Jaime Lannister, while she is taking him to King's Landing in order for him to fulfill his promise of releasing Sansa and Arya. This fight leads to them both being captured by the Brave Companions, or the Bloody Mummers. Both of these wins should have benefited her, should have proved her strength, but instead, they took away her strength. They made her position in Westerosi society weaker. Now Brienne is in a different sort of battle with Lady Stoneheart, not one with swords, but one with words and actions. She is trying to prove to this undead woman that Brienne is not what she thinks she is. Brienne is not a traitor. She gave up everything in order to fulfill Kat's last wish. She's trying to appeal to Stoneheart's morals, to her heart. She wants to convince her that Jaime is here to help, that Podrick and Hyle Hunt don't deserve to die, that what she is doing is wrong. And if I'm correct about Brienne dying and being resurrected by Stoneheart, then this could be the battle that does make her stronger. The event that makes her able to fight in the Long Night and defeat the others. Failed to be strengthened at Bitterbridge, or in water, failed to be strengthened by Jaime, or a lion, and finally brought to her full potential by the sacrifice of Lady Stoneheart, or the heart of the woman that she loves. That's right, Brienne is Lightbringer, the fabled sword that was forged by Azor Ahai and that is believed to have been used by this hero to end the darkness. I will admit I have heard bits and pieces of this Lightbringer idea in the past, but I believe I am the first person to put it all together in this way. And now I will also admit that there is a lot of holes in this theory. This doesn't take into account some of the other fights that she's had, namely with the members of the Bloody Mummers that she's battled and killed throughout A Feast for Crows. And a lot of the old prophecies are so vague that a lot of the facts could be twisted around and meant to say whatever you want them to. Anyone could be Azor Ahai, or Nissa Nissa, or a Lightbringer if you try hard enough. But the pieces are there to make this happen, and I like Brienne, so I choose to believe it. I also think it works really well for Brienne's character. She's often considered the heart of A Song of Ice and Fire. She brings light to the darkness that is the narrative in these books. It's only fitting that this sense of justice that she has is used to save the world. But now we must consider how this will work. What does Brienne being Lightbringer mean exactly? Well, this legendary sword was used by Azor Ahai, so whoever the prince who was promised is could use Brienne as a key part in whatever plan they have. If she meets either Jon or Dany, I could really see either of them making Brienne a sworn sword for them. Jon could see her as an asset due to her devotion to the Starks, and Dany could use her for an alliance with Tarth. Tarth could be an advantageous outpost for Dany in her invasion into Westeros, considering that it is an island in between Westeros and Essos. In fact, Aegon has apparently already captured Tarth in his conquest of the Seven Kingdoms. Brienne could swear her and her father's allegiance in exchange for Daenerys freeing her home. I feel like this idea particularly works for Dany because, unlike Jon, Dany doesn't have any fighting skills. Thus, it makes sense for someone else to be her sword, and the people around her right now that can use a sword are probably not gonna be around her much longer. Yes, I do think Barristan is going to die at the Battle of Meereen. Real hot take there, I know. There are also some theories out there that the Long Night is actually going to end in a peace agreement, since the odds are so overwhelmingly against the living that this is the only option that makes sense. This is based on the notion that the Night's King myth, the story of a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch falling in love with and marrying a corpse queen, which was most likely a woman other, is actually a misconstrued interpretation of what actually happened in history. That this marriage was actually an agreement between the Night's Watch and the others in order to end the war. So if Brienne is the weapon of Azor Ahai, she could have some key part to play in these peace talks. Maybe even part of a marriage arrangement herself, which, now that I say that out loud, I really don't want that to happen to Brienne, my god. But in any way this manifests, I believe that there is at least a possibility that Brienne will play a major role in the Long Night due to this proposed resurrection. That this character, who really hasn't had much to do in the overall plot of the story, but George loves to use her to tell the reader about this world that he's created, is more important than she seems right now. Next theory. Theory number 2. Another pink letter contender. The pink letter is honestly a mystery that I never really cared about that much. Whether it was actually written by Ramsay or by someone else who was trying to trick Jon into marching south, I always thought, what does it matter? It all results in the same outcome, so I never really thought about this plot point all that much. A fellow YouTuber that makes videos on A Song of Ice and Fire, John Greenwood, just released a video on who he thinks wrote the pink letter. It's a very well done thesis, much more in depth than I am going to go into here. You should definitely check it out. But as I was watching, I had some thoughts, mainly at this moment here when he was ruling out potential candidates right out the gate.
And finally, Jane Poole is psychologically shattered by her torture and is in no state to orchestrate such a scheme.
And that got me wondering, what if Jane Poole was able to write this letter despite her trauma? In fact, I see what happened to her as more of a motivation than a hindrance. This 13-year-old girl has been through absolute hell ever since her father died during Ned's failed coup in King's Landing, and these past few weeks have been the worst of it, being married to Ramsay Snow. And now, she's free. She's been rescued by Theon and Stannis' army. She has to pretend to be Arya, but she's no longer being tormented by the men who have power over her. But then she gets to Stannis' camp, and it's not exactly the most comforting situation. They are stuck in this harsh weather, running out of food. Some of them have even resulted to cannibalism, and now part of Bolton's army is headed to this camp right now to try and defeat Stannis. She doesn't know what Stannis has planned. She doesn't know that the Manderleys are probably going to turn against the Freys during this battle. All she knows is that this army she's being protected by is not doing well and is also facing an imminent threat. Sure, she's being sent off to the wall, but if Stannis is defeated, the enemy is not going to be that far behind them. And it would not take much for them to find out where she is, kill off the handful of people guarding her, and capture her, to take her back to Ramsay. She cannot let that happen. They need help. And who else than the guy that Arya was the closest to, and now finds himself in a position of power? Jon Snow. And it's not like Jane is a complete mess. She's able to answer the questions that Mors Umber gives her in order to keep up the Arya act. She even realizes on her own that she needs to continue to be Arya in order to ensure her safety. And she is able to convince everyone back at camp that she is Arya, so she hasn't lost her mind completely. And hell, before all of this, back at Winterfell, she was a bully. A bully that grew up alongside Jon Snow. She would know exactly what to say to get under his skin and convince him to come and save her. How much he cares about Arya, the fact that Winterfell is in the hands of the people that killed Robb, how much he hates being called a bastard. It also explains some of the language that is used in the letter itself, referring to Jane and Theon as my wife and my reek, a phrase that Theon himself uses in his sample chapter from The Winds of Winter. So Jane has spent a lot of time around Theon and Ramsay, who is the person that Theon probably learned this phrasing from. So it makes sense that she would think that this is something that Ramsay would say in a letter. Even some of the inconsistencies that cause people to suspect Ramsay not being the author would be explained if it was actually Jane. The inclusion of people like Val or Mance's baby in the letter, having Ramsay refer to himself as the Lord of Winterfell and not the Lord of Hornwood, it not having the Bolton seal, the fact that it would be stupid for Ramsay to send this letter in the first place. Other suspects like Mance or Stannis or a member of the Northern Conspiracy should know that these aspects of the note would make Jon suspicious of its authenticity. But a young, desperate girl who doesn't know that much about Northern politics could easily have made these mistakes. Some of the writing even sounds childish. Come and see them. Come and get him. I'll cut out your bastard heart and eat it. Phrases that a young person might use to sound intimidating. Naturally, after having these thoughts, I then started to consider if Jane writing the pink letter would be possible. Namely, would she physically have been able to send it, having access to ravens, pink wax, and the ability to send this letter without suspicion? Then, would she know everything that is mentioned in the letter? This features what's happening at Winterfell and Stannis' encampment, including the fact that Mance Rayder was one of the people that rescued her, and what's happening at Castle Black. All of the people that are there, the political unrest, and the fact that Jon has access to a bunch of wildlings that he could bring south to Winterfell. Let's start with her physically being able to send this thing. We know that there are ravens at Stannis' camp, at least 2, according to Theon's sample chapter. It's fair to assume that at least one of these ravens goes to Castle Black, since Stannis' men, family, and Melisandre are there. It's not out of the question that they would let Arya send a letter to Jon telling him that she's on her way. That way they could prepare for their arrival, and if they didn't make it, at least somebody would be aware and would go look for them. They are still in the north during winter. Anything could happen to them on the way. There is also a secondary mission in this escort of Jane to Castle Black. Sir Justin Massey is to head to Braavos via Eastwatch by the Sea to collect a loan from the Iron Bank and then to hire sellswords and bring them back to Stannis. Stannis would need to inform Jon of this travel request. Stannis could have needed to send this letter anyway and just let Jane be the main scribe so that way it proves that he rescued his half-sister. Or it could have just let her send this message outright. It is smart to have news of Arya's rescue reach Jon as soon as possible. Jane could have written out the note that Stannis wanted, had it checked, and then, when it came to actually sending the letter, attach the pink letter to the raven instead. This makes more sense in my opinion than her just sneaking up to the cages and sending them without anyone noticing. It's too conspicuous and she probably doesn't know which raven actually goes to Castle Black. Although I guess she could have written 2 copies and attached them to both ravens and let them go if she's desperate enough. The person in charge of the ravens at this encampment is a person called Maester Tybalt. If you haven't read Theon's sample chapter from Winds of Winter, this part is probably going to be hard to follow. I'm sorry. Tybalt was brought here by Lord Arnulf Karstark. However, the Karstarks are actually traitors, and Tybalt is really the maester for the Dreadfort and is spying for Roose Bolton. Since he is here, there is a good chance that there is pink wax somewhere in this camp that Jane could potentially get her hands on. And we don't know right now who is actually in charge of the Ravens since Tybalt was ousted from his role. Jane could approach this new person saying that she has a letter to send, and unless it's Stannis himself or something, I could see the reaction of anyone else in this camp to this girl, who they believe is a very traumatized Arya Stark, being to let her send it off without much scrutiny, without even noticing that the letter Jane or this mystery person is attaching to the raven is sealed with pink wax instead of, Stannis' seal or the seal of House Stark. The same way none of us readers have suspected her of wrongdoing, everyone else in this encampment would underestimate her. So it is at least theoretically possible that she could send this letter out without anybody knowing the contents of it. Now, would she know everything that is mentioned in the pink letter? Let's start with the easy stuff. She would obviously know that Arya has been rescued by Theon and that neither of them are in Winterfell anymore. The fact that Ramsay calls Theon Reek and he would want both of them back. She would know that Jon would be receiving this letter and, as I described before, know how to psychologically convince him to come and rescue her. She also knows that Stannis and part of Roos's army are about to fight and that this is a battle that Stannis has a high chance of losing, at least from an outsider's perspective. Jane could also find out about the politics happening at the Wall through her time spent with the people at Stannis' camp. I very much doubt she is just wandering around this village that they're at. She is a very important person and is also recovering from frostbite. They're most likely keeping her in one place. It's unclear who she's kept with, but she's most likely being guarded by someone like Justin Massey or Alysanne Mormont, if not multiple people. And these guys love to gossip, and they have nothing else to do but talk. She could easily find out that Selyse, Shireen, and Melisandre are at Castle Black, and that Mance's baby is there as well, that Val is there, and that a lot of people suspect that her and Jon are very close, and that he would care about her safety. It even explains why Val is referred to as a wildling princess, since that is what Stannis' crowd calls her. I've never seen anyone mention this actually, but it is weird how the letter uses the term crow for the Night's Watchman, which is a wildling phrase, but Val is referred to as the wildling princess, which is something that no wildling would do. She is just the sister of the woman that Mance was with, not royalty. If Mance wrote the letter, as some people suspect that he does because of this crow line, how did he know to edit himself when it came to Val and call her a wildling princess, but didn't catch himself and use the correct word for the Night's Watch? But then, why would anybody else use the term crow? And for this discussion, why would Jane think Ramsay would use the term crow? Jane does know that this is a term that wildlings use. In fact, as she was being rescued by the Spearwives, one of them referred to Jon as Lord Crow, and Jane immediately knew who they were referring to. She could be using this as another way to rattle Jon rather than ensuring the accuracy of the letter. Crow is typically an insult for the Night's Watch, so she could have seen it as another way to catch Jon off guard. I'll admit, this part is still a bit shaky. But the biggest point of contention is how Jane knew that Mance Rayder was one of the people that rescued her. Theon doesn't even know that. Theon does know that the washerwomen were actually wildlings, and he refers to them as such, but he only ever calls Mance a belle and a singer. So while Jane knows about the Spearwives, she was there when Theon was explaining everything to Asha, there's no way that she could have known Abel's true identity from Theon. Or from the Spearwives, for that matter, since none of them are at the village, at least that we know of. I guess Squirrel could have gotten out of Winterfell and made her way to Jane, but that is such a stretch that even I'm not going to seriously consider it. And Jane could not have figured this out through deduction either. There is a very small handful of people that know that Mance is alive, and none of them are close to Jane. Everyone else thinks he was burned alive. There is no way she would know without outside influence that Abel is actually Mance. The only way I can think of for Jane to figure this out is if Mance was actually captured by the Boltons, and that information made it all the way back to Stannis' camp. Mance being captured is not that crazy of an idea. He would try to die fighting, but this is an entire castle versus him, and he is at best lightly armed. I think they can manage in capturing him alive. And I'm sure that Ramsay, at the very least, could torture his true identity out of him. Mance is a strong and stubborn man, but we've seen what Ramsay can do. And if he actually is hung up in a cage in the middle of Winterfell, it wouldn't be that hard for Stannis' people who are watching Winterfell to get that information back to Stannis. And that information would be sure to spread around camp. However, if this is the case, it is very weird that they don't talk about it in Theon's sample chapter. This is a major piece of news, and they talk about Jon in this scene. To discuss Jon without mentioning the fact that, from their perspective, Jon apparently faked Mance's death seems impossible. So this means that the information must have arrived after this scene, but Jane and her entourage are leaving the next day. That is a very narrow amount of time for the information to get there, Jane to formulate her plan, and then to actually carry it out. It's possible, but again, very shaky. Of course, it is still very unlikely that Jane wrote this letter, but there is the slight possibility, and I just really like this idea. This poor girl finally having some agency and trying to get someone to come and help her, only to find out that her actions likely got that same person killed. So tragic and so George. Can y'all believe that I did not care at all about the pink letter before making this video? Wild. Anyway, next theory. Theory number 3. Miracle baby. Did I come up with this theory so that I have an excuse to talk about my favorite character in the entire mythos of A Song of Ice and Fire? No comment. Rhaena Targaryen, eldest child of King Aerys I and Lady Alyssa Velaryon, queen in the East and West, the OG disaster lesbian, and the love of my life. She is perfect in every way, and yet somehow, at the same time, I could fix her. She also happens to be George R.R. Martin's favorite punching bag, apparently. Her life is just an endless barrage of pain and suffering. Forced to marry a man and have his children, despite the fact that you're gay. Have that man be your brother. Have that same man murdered by your uncle, thus disinheriting you from the throne, which was the only cool thing about being married to your brother. On the same day, the woman that was your childhood romance dies defending your claim. That same uncle then holding your daughters hostage and forcing you to marry him. And you're not even his only wife. He has 3 others. And it would be 5, but he tortured one of them to death because he thought that she was unfaithful, and he probably murdered the other one because she was rude to him. And this isn't even her worst marriage. Many other horrific things happened to her, all culminating in one of her twin daughters, Arya, dying at the age of 14 in probably the worst way imaginable, and not just in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, but possibly any piece of fiction ever. And at the end of all of this, her brother, King Jaehaerys, who succeeded Maegor after he died, by the way, gives her Harrenhal as like a sorry your kid died present, and she spends the rest of her life there, by herself, occasionally visiting her living daughter Rhaella until she dies at the age of 50. I believe someone who has had the life that Rhaena lived deserves a better ending. Don't you? What I have come up with is maybe not a better ending for her, but it's definitely a more fitting one. Rhaena had an interesting relationship with her children and with motherhood in general. Like other characters in this world, she seems to like the idea of having children more than her actual children. Think of someone like Tywin. She saw them as extensions of herself, pieces in the Game of Thrones that gave her power, not as actual people in their own right. I believe this changed once Arya died. She does appear to at least want to try and make a connection with Rhaella, but Rhaella seems to have more of a connection with the religion of the Seven than with Rhaena. At one point in Fire and Blood, she's quoted as saying to Rhaena, "I have the best mother any child could wish for, the mother above, and you are to thank for her." Yikes. It could be interpreted that Rhaena was not a great mom. Rhaena herself certainly seems to believe so. As a result, in her later years, I could definitely see her trying to be a mother again, to try and do a better job this time. Now, y'all out there who have read Fire and Blood might be thinking, Rhaena would never want to have kids again. She was offended when Alysanne suggested that very thing to her. However, crucially, Alysanne suggested that she find another husband and have children with him. She only responded negatively to being attached to a man again. Her response is, "I fed my last husband to my dragon. If you make me take another, I may eat him myself." She doesn't say anything about children. Oh my god. I just realized this is another secret Targaryen theory. What is wrong with me? The next question, of course, is how could Rhaena have children without a man? Well, there is a rumor about another Targaryen woman that could help in answering this question. A woman that Rhaena knew her entire life. Now, I don't think that Visenya Targaryen and Rhaena were, like, close or anything. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they hated each other. Visenya played a major part in putting Maegor on the throne, thus deposing Rhaena and her husband. So there's a bit of bad blood there, but there was some overlap there. Critically, Rhaena spent a lot of time at Dragonstone during her whole Queen of the East era. Visenya spent a lot of time there too. Most importantly for this theory, this is where she gave birth to Maegor. And Rhaena could have found some information at Dragonstone about how exactly this pregnancy occurred. Now, I don't usually like stories about women in history doing evil, witchy things in real life. However, in this fictional setting, Visenya using blood magic to have a child so that way Aegon the Conqueror wouldn't set her aside after Rhaenys died is funny, so I like it. I also enjoy the idea that both this rumor and the one saying that Rhaenys got pregnant from some random guy are true, that Aegon was actually infertile and that all of his descendants weren't actually directly from him. He's just everyone's many greats' uncle. I think it's a neat twist on the importance the society puts on bloodlines and names and all of that. I'm getting off topic again. I am suggesting it's possible that Rhaena learned this method either directly or most likely indirectly from Visenya and used that to have a new child. One that she's never separated from, one that she's raising from birth, one that she can use what she learned from her shortcomings with Arya and Rhaella to try and be better. At Harrenhal, she's secluded, she sees no company, all the small folk think that she's a witch. This could all be a result of her hiding a child that should not exist. And those who would probably know about this child, that being the household that lives in another tower of this castle, are said to have grown close to her and could have easily kept this secret for her. And besides, Harrenhal seems like a very appropriate place for this ritual to happen. There is power there. Power from the old gods on the Isle of Faces and the God's Eye Lake that the castle sits next to. Many have died in its halls, which have supposedly cursed its very stones. It is implied that there is some sort of dark, powerful magic there. Magic that could help Rhaena in her task. But who is this child? I believe it is someone we know. Someone who we meet later in Fire and Blood at Harrenhal. Someone with a mysterious background and who is suggested to be older than she seems. I'm just saying she might be a little bit older than that. The enigma that is Alice Rivers is the daughter of Rhaena Targaryen, appearing younger than she is and possessing unknown powers due to the circumstances of how she came into this world. First question you may have, Alice does not look like Rhaena. We don't know much about her appearance, but we do know that she has black hair, not the silver gold of Rhaena or the expected appearance of someone with Valyrian descent. Maegor still had the typical Targaryen look, so the magic that brought her about would not be an excuse for this. Easy enough to explain, she wants to hide her parentage. The small folk already think that she is a witch queen, let's not add fuel to the fire here. So, she poses as a bastard of House Strong. Whether it is Lord Lionel or someone else, doesn't matter. To play this part, all she has to do is dye her hair to hide that telltale silver. We've seen before in A Song of Ice and Fire how well this tactic is at hiding one's identity, like with Sansa and with young Griff, another supposed secret Targaryen. This gives new meaning to where we left off her story at the end of Fire and Blood, with the supposed true-born son of Aemon One-Eye that she gave birth to, a child that she claims is the true heir to the Iron Throne after Aegon II's death. Aemond was his named heir, and this is his son. The Seven Kingdoms must pass on to him and not to Aegon the Younger. I am endlessly reminded that there are too many Aegons in this goddamn series. One may ask why she would name her child after Maegor, a man who caused so much pain to her mother. Well, she didn't. There was another man named Maegor in Alice's life, a man that she actually met and hadn't died years before she was born. Maegor Towers, the head of the household that lived at Harrenhal at the same time as Rhaena, a man that Rhaena apparently formed a friendship with. Perhaps Maegor Towers even helped raise Alice, a child that he himself could never have. Alice named her son not after a cruel king, but after the man that was the closest thing she had to a father. Alice's fight to get baby Maegor on the throne is not just to affirm his rights, but to avenge her mother, whose first husband was killed and her queenship denied, her second husband, who made her a queen but didn't give her any of the power of one, and her brother, 11 years her younger and never expected to rule, placed on the throne over her. She has sought the Iron Throne throughout her entire life again and again and has been denied. But now, with her daughter, her line can be acknowledged. Maybe that was the plan all along when she got into the bed of Aemon One-Eye, to finally bring justice to Queen Rhaena Targaryen, a woman who has been endlessly belittled and traumatized, to bring justice to my queen. But I guess she failed in her plan. Whatever it was, since Maegor never became king. Oh well. That's the theory. Yay! Thank you all so much for listening to my insane ramblings once again. Hope you had fun. If you did, I would greatly appreciate if you liked the video and subscribed to my channel to see what nonsense I come up with next. If you have thoughts on anything that I've said, supporting evidence, critiques, theories of your own, leave them in the comments down below. They're always fun to read through, even if you disagree with me. I'll probably do a follow-up video like I did last time reacting to some of y'all's comments, so if you do leave your thoughts down below, you could be featured in that upcoming video. Also, I want to do a quick thanks for those of y'all who watched my last video on this channel. I knew it wasn't going to do as well as my A Song of Ice and Fire videos, since it was more of a, personal passion project thing, but the algorithm really did not like that video, so to the handful of y'all that checked it out, I really appreciate you. And to all of you out there, thank you again so much for watching, and I hope you will join me in my next video, even if it has nothing to do with A Song of Ice and Fire. Bye. No! Chojik, come back to me! Are you good? Okay. Where the hell was I?